folks. That's our technology. We enjoy it, but it does sometimes takes just a second to go live. Almost. Okay, we are live on YouTube. Today's presentation is on safe sidewalks, and I'll be presenting on that subject. Sidewalks are one of those necessary evils. They're a great thing in our communities, but they can cause us a lot of problems. So today, this is the outline of what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about what's really our goal as it pertains to sidewalks. Talk about public right-of-ways, the liability that we face, how we get ourselves into trouble sometimes, and how to build a program that can be effective in managing this major part of our public infrastructure and be able to avoid those big losses and have people get injured in our communities. So that's what we'll talk about. First of all, what's our goal? What are the things that we're trying to accomplish when it comes to sidewalks? Well, one, we want safe pedestrian movement through our communities. Okay, that seems like a pretty reasonable thing, and that's probably why many of your communities have decided to put sidewalks in place, or if you just have a building, you put those sidewalks around there so people aren't stepping in mud puddles or trying to find a way into your building. We're providing them a safe path of travel. Another of our major goals is to prevent accidents. We don't want people to get hurt, and we really don't want to get sued. We really don't want to have to pay out for injuries or other damages that happen because of our infrastructure. And so those are really our goals. We want to have safe travel through our communities and not have people get hurt. And we really don't want to pay out money because people got hurt. So one of the concepts that we start out talking about are public rights of way. A public right of way is really an easement to allow travel for the general public. In most cases, the property that sidewalk sits on is probably owned by the homeowner or the person owning that property there. But we as an organization have secured an easement to travel along there, and we put the sidewalk there. So basically they're owning the property, but we have this route of travel that's going over that. The right of way is generally thought of as being from sidewalk to sidewalk in improved communities. Maybe a little bit different out in the county unincorporated areas, but when we think of a traditional city, sidewalk to sidewalk. One of the major questions that we have to ask ourselves is, what does our local ordinance say about sidewalks? Who owns what? Who owns the property? Who is responsible for what? If a sidewalk needs to be repaired or replaced, who is responsible for that? In many cities, that has been spelled out by ordinance that the property owner owns that. What about the trees that line that park strip along our road? Who owns the tree? Who can cut the tree down? Who can do maintenance to it? Who removes the snow? What happens if they don't remove the snow? What is the option that we have as an organization? And most of the people that are doing this will be cities. So if I don't leave it generic enough, we'll figure cities or whatever organization it may be. It could be a county, it could be any number of different organizations. So all of these things are questions that we have to ask, and it will be fairly individualized to our own ordinance, the code that we have set for our organization. And it varies a little bit throughout from one organization to another. And so that's really the place that we should start, is saying, what kind of public right of way do we have? Who owns what, and who can do what? Who's required to do this or that? And what happens if we have somebody out there who can't afford to pay to do this? What are our options when it comes to that type of a situation? Maybe there's somebody out there because of their age or health that can't shovel the snow. What are our options there when it comes to that? Okay, so let's talk about sidewalk liability. Here's first there's a kind of this concept of, if I don't install sidewalks, I don't have any sidewalk liability. And that's kind of true. It's kind of correct. If I don't have sidewalks, I really it's pretty difficult for somebody to sue my organization based on tripping and falling, because the public improvement was never put there. But in many cases, we've decided that this is one of the amenities or one of the public improvements that is really valuable to our community. We want to have safe sidewalks so people can travel from house to house and throughout our community, and trails go along with this as well. We've made the decision that we're going to put this public infrastructure in. As soon as I pour a slab of concrete, I own some liability for that. So if I have a sidewalk, I own it, and I own the liability that may go along with there. And I know there's some ins and outs of whether you're responsible for these things, and that's what we'll talk about next. But we really need to get used to that concept that, hey, if I build a building, if I lay down a sidewalk, I own some measure of liability as it pertains to that public improvement. So liability is the state of being responsible for something. So there's a lot that goes into that, but just and most of you that have been on these webinars before know this concept, but there needs to be a duty. I owe somebody a duty. So in this case with sidewalks, if I put a sidewalk out there, my duty is to ensure that it's in reasonably safe condition for people to safely travel. If I breach that duty, so I allow an uplift, a 4-inch uplift in my sidewalk, that's a breach of my duty to provide a safe travel route. And if somebody's injured as the proximal cause of that, so this uplift, I'm walking along and I didn't see that uplift and I tripped and I injured myself, then a case can be brought. Now, will I end up owning that? Then there's some other some different things that go into whether I will have that or not. Okay, so duty is, once again, it's just a legal obligation that requires a standard of reasonable care. What would reasonable care be? Well, it wouldn't be a 4-inch uplift on that sidewalk, and we have to ask ourselves, what standards are we going to be held to? Who do I owe that duty to? And when it's a public sidewalk, it's really everybody. Anybody who wants to walk up and down that street because it's a public right-of-way, I owe that duty to every one of those people. And we have to realize that there's a real continuum in the type of people that will be using our facilities. Some are more vulnerable than others. Some are more at risk than others. Some people say, but wait, you can't sue the government. I have governmental immunity. And truthfully, that's right in concept and in the law. This is the state code on this that says we have immunity from suit for any injury. Let's see, I've got to look over here. I can't see it. Any injury that results from the exercise of a governmental function. And that sounds great. But there's some things that go into that make it really difficult. One, what is a governmental function? Is law enforcement a governmental function? Probably in most cases. Is collecting taxes a governmental function? Yeah, I think that definitely falls as a governmental function. But what about sidewalks? Is that a governmental function? Maybe, maybe not. We think of any business can go out and they can build a sidewalk in front of their building, and that's not necessarily a governmental function. So we've got some hurdles to jump here. How do we get into trouble though? We get into trouble when we breach our duty. It says Our governmental immunity is waived when injury is caused by a defective, unsafe, or dangerous condition of a public improvement. Case in point, sidewalk. If it's defective, unsafe, or dangerous, then our governmental immunity can be waived. Now, it's not always, and sometimes we're able to defend that, but if we have been negligent in an act or an omission of something that we should have done, then we can be brought into a suit, and we might end up paying out on that. This is probably really small on your page, but these are some of the things that you go through to determine, is this a governmental function? And really, when we look at sidewalk cases, here's a lot of stuff there, and we'll send out a copy of the slides from this presentation so you can look at that in detail. All right, so with sidewalks, what is our standard of care? What is a safe sidewalk? Well, number one, we want to build it to industry standards. What is that? What is the industry standard for this? Well, the Federal Highway Administration has built some standards around that. There are other industry standards as well that says this is the appropriate slope, the location of it, the type of surfacing that we put on there. All kinds of stuff goes into the actual design and construction of our sidewalk to start with. The surface should be anti-slip. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means our surface of our concrete should be broomed, so it's not a polished surface, because if it's out there in the open, there's going to be snow, there's going to be rain, there's going to be all kinds of things. So we want to have a reasonable surface on that. Probably the biggest question that most of you may have, most of you will know this, but what is too much of a trip hazard? And really, a 1/4 inch is the point where we look at that as a trip hazard. And I say we from the trust angle, but more importantly is, what is the standard? The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, defines a trip hazard as anything a 1/4 inch or more. And so that's really the standard that we're going to be judged by. The Federal Highway Administration as well has a similar standard there. And then case law has really shown us that when we get above a 1/4 inch uplift, that's where we can get into trouble when it comes to sidewalk injuries and lawsuits. Now, obviously, there's going to be a continuum there. A 1/4 inch, we add an extra 1/16 of an inch to that 1/4 inch. Well, that's not nearly as bad as that 4 inch uplift or 2 inch uplift. That seems a lot more egregious. Okay. Other things that we look at are holes in the walking surface, spalling, where the top of the surface slips, kind of flakes off, drainage problems, all of these things, and even down to free of snow and ice. Doug did a presentation on slips and falls prevention today, and we talked about timely removal of snow and ice. That's one of the things that we are going to be judged on. Is everybody knows it snows, and sometimes it snows really hard, and it's putting down inches an hour. Well, there's going to be a reasonableness standard on that if we end up getting sued. What was reasonable? And if it's a week later after the storm, that's not timely, and that's probably we're probably going to have a problem when it comes to that. Okay. Couple of cases, and once again, I'll just let everybody know, and you probably figured this out a long time ago, that I am not an attorney, and so when I talk about case law, I'm not giving legal advice here, but there were two cases here, and there are others, but two really important cases. One was in 1973. It was West versus Provo City, and it basically said the city's not liable for snow and ice unless they did something that was negligent, like we left it too long, or we designed it in a certain way But just because it snows, just because there's ice there, the city was not necessarily liable for just the presence of a slippery surface. Okay, so that was a good one for most of us in local governments. And then in 2013, we had Kerr versus the city of Salt Lake. This was a really kind of an earth-shattering case because it kind of undid a lot of things that we'd had in the past. What happened was there was a section of sidewalk in front of a business that had some uplift. I believe it was a new business had gone in there. They contacted the city. It was damaged surface. They noted that and they said, hey, we don't want our customers having issues with the sidewalk there. We want it to be safe for our customers. They contacted Salt Lake City and said, we would like to have this section of sidewalk repaired. The city said, okay, that's great. We have a program. We work with you on this, and it was a cost sharing thing. They had somebody go out, take a look at the sidewalk. They said, yes, that needs to be repaired. We'll get on this. Anyway, within less than a week after this whole process started, and it was in process, the city was participating. They were, I believe, getting contractor set up to do this. During that time, a person named Kerr tripped on this section of sidewalk and was injured. And this one went all the way to the Supreme Court in the state, and they found for the plaintiff. And it kind of changed things and made all of us have to live to maybe a little higher standard when it comes to this. The court found that the city did not act quickly enough when an unsafe condition was identified. So that kind of made us go, wow, this is a whole different standard than what we've dealt with in the past. And so keep that in mind, that's there. I think many cases might be handled differently, but that's a pretty monumental case because it went to the state Supreme Court. All right. Some people may be asking the question, but don't people own some responsibility for their own actions? If they trip over something that's open and obvious out there on a sidewalk, how do they not see that? And the answer is yes. People own a certain level of responsibility, and so we have things called like comparable negligence that we call it in the field, where we say, hey, this person is responsible for a certain amount of things. So if you're a healthy person, good eyesight, and you don't have issues with walking, all of those things, you probably own a lot more responsibility than somebody who maybe is sightless or has some other physical characteristic that makes it difficult for them to see or identify what those risks are to them. And so we have that comparable negligence that can help us. But when we look at our sidewalks, we need to look, I'm going to design that and manage that sidewalk to the most vulnerable people. Over the weekend, I took my family, went to an event, 4th of July thing, and as we were walking to that area, my 14-year-old daughter, she's almost 15, trips over a little uplift in the sidewalk. She didn't fall down; she just kind of stumbled, and we laughed at her. And I said, Emma, I'm going to talk about you in my webinar on Monday. Emma is a much different case than somebody who, whether they're sightless, wheelchair, you name it. There are a number of different conditions there. Maybe I'm just not very stable on my feet. that will all be taken into account. And so we need to design and manage our sidewalk system to the most vulnerable in our population. Okay, so coming back to this, Doug talked about this morning. We need to be reasonable and prudent and be able to prove it. That means we need to have a program in place, a written program, and we need to document the things that we do. We need to follow that program. That's such the really essential part of this, is have a plan, have a program, get out there and inspect, like Doug talked about in his presentation. We got to get out and look at these things, and we've got to take action. So here's some elements of a safe sidewalk program. One, have a written program, snow and ice removal program, how we handle that, an inventory of our sidewalks, ranking the problems and the condition of our walking surfaces, making hazards visible, and the procedure of repair and replacement, and who pays for it all. These are all important parts of that. So once again, have a written program, write it down. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. There are tons of great programs out there. Juan is on here. I was gonna kind of pat him on the back a little bit for Springville City, but he's not there anymore. Springville has a great program, and it's available online, so you can look it up. And it really outlines that. And I'm not just picking out Springville. There are tons of you out there that have good programs. Go in, call the other cities and say, how are you doing this? And put your program put your program together. Share those things. Let's get better together. This program needs to pair with your local ordinance. Who owns the trees? Who's responsible for repair and maintenance of the sidewalk? We need to follow that. Should also be part of our accessibility plan as we look at planning for those with disabilities. How do we, when we talk ADA corners and accessibility, those types of plans, all of this should dovetail together, so we have a comprehensive plan. What are appropriate modes of travel? And I just threw this one in because this is a current challenge that some of the larger cities are seeing, and it may extend to the smaller cities where we have these rental scooters. What is appropriate modes of travel? And I probably won't go out on a limb on this one, but it does concern me when we have people going at a fairly high rate of speed on these scooters, intermixed with pedestrian traffic. It also makes me concerned. What if we put those scooters out in the traffic lane? That's a concern to me as well. But it's something I think we all have to look at and face what the realities are as modes of travel change. What's our timeline to repair and replace an unsafe condition? This is probably one of the most challenging and the most important things, because we all want to do the right thing. The hard part is paying for it, is coming up with enough cash to replace this really expensive infrastructure. And that's probably the crux of our program. We can identify all day long, but if we don't fix it, then we start worrying about that Salt Lake City court case, and can we have to pay for this? All right, snow and ice removal. Who's responsible for removing snow and ice? What if they don't do it? What does our ordinance say? Can we charge this person, or can we fine the person? I'd prefer not to do fines. I'd prefer just, hey, if it's not done, we're going to go out and clean it up, and we're going to send them a bill for it if that's what your ordinance says. But we've got to look at that ordinance and ensure that we've covered all of our bases. What about those that are unable to do that? So we find these hardship cases. Well, here we have an elderly person, and they're on a fixed income, and they don't have the physical ability to do this or the money to do that. Do we have an option in there to handle those situations? Because I know it stinks to have to go out and clear walks, but it may be something that we'll have to do to ensure safe travel through our communities. What about the sidewalks around our buildings? Doug talked about this in his presentation, but let's have a snow removal log. Let's document the things that we do to make it safe. In the absence of that, then it's our words against the person that maybe fell down or their attorney that can cause us some problems. But if I've got that document that says every time it snowed, we went out and we cleared the snow and we put down ice melt, that shows that we're being reasonable and prudent. Have the tools and materials available. It's a real bummer if you get to work and there's 4 inches of snow out there, and you go in the front door, and you're going to be a good person and help clear the snow because you're the first one there, and there's no shovel available. Make sure those are available, because that goes back to that reasonable and prudent standard. All right, just a little detour here for a second on trails. So what about trails? Do we have to keep trails clear and open during the winter? In many places, they're like, well, these trails are summer trails, and the reality is that we have. Let me jump ahead here to this page. This is a memo that came. That came from the Federal Highway Administration, and it said that if you're taking federal money to build these sidewalks or trails, you got to keep them open, and that means during the winter time as well. Really? And the answer is yes. And so we've got some decisions to make on that. Sorry. There we go. We need to, number one, design our trails at the outset. We need to make them appropriate for winter travel. A lot of the trails that I see may have really steep slopes, or they may have shady corners that are going to be a nightmare when it comes to preventing slip and fall hazards during the winter time. Some options you may want to think about. Maybe we take this trail and we turn it into a Nordic trail, a cross-country ski trail in the wintertime. I'm still keeping it open for people to use, but it may be a lot less maintenance to run out across that with a four-wheeler and a groomer than it is to try to clear all that snow out, particularly in areas where we have a lot of snow. All right, just a thought to muddy the water a little bit more. Sidewalk inventory and inspections. These are really essential to make this program work. So I want to have an inventory of all sidewalks, and I want to do that on a regular basis. So whatever time frame we look at there, what's reasonable, I would be doing this on a constant basis, where we're taking, so it's not, okay, this year we're going to go and inventory all the sidewalks. That's fine, but I would probably just make that part of what we do. So we get out and we look at every panel of sidewalk within a 2 to 3 year period, and identify all of those. We want to prioritize the sections: high hazard, high traffic, and high risk or at-risk populations. Some sections of sidewalk are much more critical than others. There are sections where we have a lot of traffic, where we have a lot of hazards in the area. If I've got a sidewalk right along, I'm looking out on US 89 here. If I've got a really bad spot in the sidewalk, I don't want people jumping off of the sidewalk to go around it and stepping on the major highway. At-risk populations. If I have a school, if I have a nursing home, if I have an area that has a population of people that are at higher risk, those are areas that we want to prioritize more than just the average sidewalk that's out there and doesn't get a lot of travel. All right, so different categories of conditions: cracking or holes in the surface, heaving or settling. This is probably the most common one that we see, is at those joints we get uplifts or sinking. Spalling, just where the surface of the concrete has flaked off. Maybe the aggregate is showing there. Drainage problems, where I'll end up with puddles, and those puddles could freeze and become really slippery. Other things are hazards, protruding bolts or rebar or things like that could be a hazard to pedestrians as well. So priority, if we're looking at or heaving or settling, this is probably the most important one or the most common one. From a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch is low priority. But as we go up in that height or the type of uplift, maybe it's broken, maybe it's at a weird angle, one side is up, the other isn't. Any of those things can increase the hazard. Spalling. So when we talk about the top surface, sometimes you work the concrete a little bit too much. Sometimes you get salt or other things that attack the concrete, and the top layer comes off. This is called spalling. So we look at the amount of spalling. So I take a given panel and some numbers that are thrown out there up to about 25% we call moderate risk, but beyond that, if we go above 50%, then that's a lot higher risk. If I start having the aggregate come out, and so there are holes, that are 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch, that becomes extreme risk. Okay. Drainage. What are the puddles? If I have a small puddle that doesn't maybe cover the full width of the sidewalk, that might be a lot less of a risk than something that puddles and goes all the way to the road surface, and something that may cause ice buildup and slip hazards. All right, so here's kind of the principle that we look at on this. We want to address the extreme and high priority cases now. This is something that we need to dive into and spend some money on. We need to put a reasonable amount of money towards dealing with these problems. That's what we're going to be judged against. Have we been reasonable and prudent? So put our money towards those high priority and extreme risk areas now. And then we need to schedule and budget for those moderate and low priorities. We realize that you can't go out and replace every panel of sidewalk in your city this year. It takes time to do that, and but we have to be reasonable about that. If I'm going to put $1,000 towards, or depending on the size of your city, $100 towards sidewalk repair and replacement, they're going to laugh you out of court on that. It needs to be a reasonable amount, and that's really based on what is the size and extent of the public infrastructure in your city. If I can't fix it right now, what can I do to prevent or to reduce the risk that I'll have a problem there? Well, we want to mark that. Let's go out and paint these uplifts, paint these problems with high visibility paint, so people will see that there's an issue there. Hopefully we won't have a fall there, but at least we've gone and made that open and obvious. This is something that when we talk about hazards, we want those to be open and obvious and not hidden, and that can help our argument. All right. So repair and replacement. So we have to ask ourselves, can it be repaired? Sometimes it's to a point where there's really no option but to replace the entire panel. So we want a standard on that. What must be replaced? We look at that spalling. Well, if I get 50% of that, there's, unless I can resurface that, depending on the situation there, I'll probably be replacing it. If uplifts are to a certain point, you talk to the grinding companies, and they'll have a certain point. If it's beyond 2 inches of uplift, which I think the standard for most of the grinding companies, they say we can't grind it at that point. So who does the work? How do we pay for it? In many cities, the homeowner is required to do this, and so how do we go about getting them to do that and getting them to pay for that. Some cities have built a program where it's a cost sharing. And as I looked around, just kind of get a little bit of an idea of what's going on, there are a lot of cities right now that said, "Hey, our budget is really tight because of change due to COVID-19." Changes in our tax income, so we're just shutting this off right now. There's no budget money for that cost sharing, and I understand that, but those are things that we should think about. How are we going to pay for that? Grinding is a good option for those smaller uplifts. It gives us a way to buy us some time as we have some of those less serious hazards that are out there. We can hire a company or buy a grinder ourselves and go out and ease those edges. Repair or patching problems, sometimes that's a possibility as well, and then down to the removal and replacement. Just a couple of things to think about here. Trees cause problems, and so as you go about building your ordinance, think about what types of trees, if you want to regulate the types of trees that are out there. This is something that also impacts our sewer losses as well. If we're planting willows and cottonwoods in these areas, we'll probably have problems not only with our sidewalks, but we'll have problems with our sewers as well. So planning on those, and residents cause problems. So think as we build our ordinance, and come up with some good guidance that will help people not have problems with these. Like I said, how do we pay for it all? The standard that we're looking at is we want to be reasonable and prudent. So we need to have a reasonable timeline so we can defend ourselves in the event that somebody does happen to trip on a hazard that we've identified out there. Let's get those extreme or high risk situations taken care of as soon as possible. I realize it can't be done by next week, but some of it can. Some of it's bad enough that we may need to barricade that section and keep people away from it because it's an imminent danger situation. Sometimes we have the ability to share costs with property owners, like I said, something out of your ordinance. UDOT also has what they call a safe sidewalk program, and where they will do a 25% contribution if the sidewalk that needs to be repaired is next to a state highway. And there's it's a UDOT program, so there are quite a bit of caveats that are on there that go along with it, but that can help us with that as well. Lots of resources out there. Like I said, I threw Springville on here because their program looked really good, but there are a ton of others, not just in the state of Utah, but from all over the country, where they've got great sidewalk programs. And that's the great thing about being in government, is we can borrow from each other and use each other's work, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel there. The Federal Highway Administration also has several guides and standards on sidewalks and how to make those safe. So I've got some links here. We'll send that out. And just in summary, know what your local ordinance is, what it controls, and who owns what, and build your program. Put it together today. Write it down. Make sure it pairs with your ordinance. And do those inspections. Get out and audit your sidewalks, and let's identify those hazards. If we can't get to them right now, let's mark the hazards. Prioritize. Put a reasonable amount of money towards those challenges. Doug, in his presentation, talked about some of the losses, and this is not minor. This is over $1 million per year that we're dealing with in work comp, slip and falls, as well as general liability losses. And sometimes they can be giant. Sometimes an individual claim can exceed $1 million on this, and so it is something that we should be taking into consideration and give it the appropriate amount of attention that it needs. Get these things done in a timely manner, and let's be safe out there. All right. I think that is everything that I was going to present. If you have questions or comments, type those into the chat box right now, and we will answer those. Doug and Brent, anything I missed? Anything that I goofed up on?
I think you did a great job, Jason.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate it.
I don't see any questions either. No, nothing in the chat box.
All right. Very good. Very good. Juan, I appreciate that. I'll pass that information on to Brent as well, so we can work with you there. Well, folks, I hope that helped out. If you have any thoughts, or if I goofed up anywhere, let me know. I'm going to send out a copy of the slides from this presentation for you to take a look at, and possibly some of the standards that are policies that I saw as I was doing research for this. Take a look at these. Take a look at these things, and let's work together. And we don't want to have people injured in our communities. We don't want to have that giant lawsuit. And I think back over a few of those. Some of our largest claims that we've seen are not in the big cities. They're in the small towns. And not only is it a gigantic financial loss, this is one of your residents in your community that gets injured. Let's work hard to prevent those things. Let's see, just had a request for a copy of the slideshow. I will send that out. It's also, we're live on YouTube right now, and it will be on our YouTube channel it probably takes an hour, I think, to render after we go live, and then you can go back and watch this later or share it with others. But just a reminder for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll get all this information. Thank you, folks. I appreciate all of your time and attention. Appreciate all of your efforts out there to make Utah a safer place. Go out and have a safe day. Oh, I have a question. What is the YouTube channel? Just go to YouTube, and there's on the search bar, search for Utah Local Governments Trust, and then it should come up, and you can get subscribed right at that point. Okay. All right, folks. Thanks so much. Go out and have a safe day.